I wanted to demo a project I started working on yesterday. It's a fully voice-controlled AI coding assistant, very much inspired by Mckay Wrigley's projects. The assistant has access to my local machine's terminal. It can read and write files and run any shell command to basically do anything on the computer. And it also has access to the internet. All of this has been possible to do with GPT models already. There's a bunch of so-called AGI projects that do similar things, AutoGPT, Baby AGI, etc. But the reason I started working on this was to better understand the new function calling capabilities of the GPT models. OpenAI recently released this blog post detailing these capabilities. I'm not going to get into it too much now, but essentially, the newest versions of the GPT models can figure out what functions to use to answer questions, and they're forced to always give the arguments for those functions in a JSON format. This is how the plugins work on ChatGPT, for example. This means very little to no hallucination as to what functions it has access to and can use, and it also means that we don't need any complex, elaborate methods to parse the responses and handle edge cases where the response isn't in the format that we expect it to be. When I saw this blog post, I immediately wanted to work on a project that gave GPT access to a bunch of functions, and the first thing that came to mind was giving it access to my terminal and the web, hence the similarities to other projects. I also didn't base the project on any pre-existing ones. All of the code was written from scratch in a day, and another part of the reason why I'm working on this is to get used to using Langchain, because I haven't worked on a large-scale project using GPT up until now. I'm using OpenAI's Whisper to do the speech-to-text transcription, and Google's text-to-speech model. Another thing to note is that I haven't fully optimized it with the best prompts that use the least amount of tokens. It's not perfect, but it's at a stage where I'm happy sharing the progress that I've made. So without further ado, let's jump into the demo. Who is the current president of the United States of America? I apologize for my mic quality being slightly worse here. I had to record myself on my phone because my laptop was using my proper mic.
The current president of the United States is Joseph R. Biden, Jr. He was sworn into office on January 20th, 2021.
What is the current directory, and how many files are in the previous directory? As you can see from that previous example, it has the ability to navigate the internet. It searches for stuff on DuckDuckGo.
The current directory is Home, Cryron, Test Copilot. The previous directory contains 19 files or directories. The command used also counts the line for the total.
Create some HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files in the current directory. These files should create a web page for a chat interface UI, then host that web interface on the localhost port 8000. So yeah, as I was saying, it has the ability to access the internet. It can search for things on DuckDuckGo, navigate to websites. It can clearly also execute commands in the terminal. Here it's executing, it creates the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files like I asked it to do. It is now reading the files, the empty files that it created. It's now finding and replacing the empty content with the necessary content for the web page that I asked it to make. And now it's adding the JavaScript, and then it should very soon try to start the server with the Python HTTP server.
The server is now running. You can access the chat interface by going to http localhost 8000 http localhost 8000 in your web browser.
But yeah, it's making these decisions all on its own. And here you can see the web page completely works. It is first try, it got the chat interface down. I'm pressing enter right now, nothing's happening, so that means that the messages only go when I press send, and when I refresh the page, the messages go away. Can you update the files so that the chat history stays when I reload the page? Can you also add a reset chat button which clears the chat? And can you also add the ability to send messages by hitting the enter key? Now I asked it to basically add a bunch of features. Again, this is a very long command, so it has to break it down into steps and figure out what it wants to do in what order. But the tricky part here is that I wanted to change a file that is already created. So it should find which file it needs to edit. It can make those changes to those files. It, again, remembers context, so it has information about what we've been talking about, so it remembers some of this stuff. And it's now updated the HTML. Now it's doing the same for the JavaScript.
I've updated the backquote script JS backquote file to handle chat history, reset chat, and send messages by hitting the enter key. You should now be able to see these changes in action when you reload the page at http localhost 8000 http localhost 8000.
Yeah, well, it works. There's the reset button right there. Refreshing the page still clears the chat, but sending the message, the enter key works, and the reset chat button should also work. And it does. It just works. It's just that good. The chat history doesn't stay when I reload the page. Can you make sure that it please stays? Okay, now again, one last command. I'm asking it to make sure that the chat history doesn't clear when I reload the page. And I don't even know how to do any of this, I'll be honest. I'm not a web front-end developer. But it should figure out that it needs to use the browser's cookies or something. I don't know how it works. I'm a Python dev. I don't do any web development, so this is not my forte. Let's see what it says. It will.
I've updated the JavaScript code to use the local storage of the browser for persisting the chat history. Now, even if you reload the page, the chat history should stay. You can test it by reloading the page at http localhost 8000 http localhost 8000.
And it works. Refreshing works.